Hi, I'm Grant Waterfall, Cybersecurity and Privacy Partner at PwC. With me today, I have Alessandro Acquisti, who is a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and I have John Verdi, who is VP Policy at the Future of Privacy Forum. We're broadcasting live from PwC's US Privacy Retreat in Minneapolis. I also wanted to highlight that today PwC released the latest in its Consumer Intelligence series, which focuses in on consumer attitudes to privacy. One of the statistics coming out of the report is that 72% of consumers believe that businesses, rather than governments, are better equipped to protect their privacy. Alessandro and John, fantastic to have you here. Thank you very much for being here. And Alessandro, I'm going to start with you with the first question. And really the first question is privacy a modern invention? And how are privacy perceptions changing right now?
I do not think it is a modern invention. It has become a little bit of a conventional wisdom nowadays to claim that privacy is modern, in that our ancestors didn't have privacy, lived in a perennial state of communal sharing, and then over the centuries, some people started having some privacy, especially during the Industrial Revolution, and now we are back to a state of, if not no privacy, at least less privacy due to the internet and IoT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, the reason why I don't believe that to be the case is that if you look at work coming from a variety of fields, ethnography, social psychology, anthropology, you find evidence of privacy-seeking behavior across time and across space. You find privacy-seeking behavior among the Tuareg, the blue men, the Saharian tribes. You find evidence of privacy-seeking behavior in pre-industrialized Java and Bali. You find evidence and references to privacy in the holy texts of ancient monotheistic religions. And that suggests that privacy is not modern. What is true is that our conceptions of privacy change over time and change with space. I believe that an American social psychologist, Irwin Altman, put it beautifully when over 40 years ago wrote, and I'm paraphrasing, privacy is simultaneously culturally universal and culturally specific. It's a wonderful sentence, because it does encapsulate this innate need for privacy as well as for socialization, but also the differences which you can find across cultures in how we address that need.
Okay. And John, how do you see this?
Well, I think Alessandro puts it exactly right, which is I don't believe it's a recent invention. But more to the point, I don't know that it matters, because if you're going to be optimistic about data, if you're going to be optimistic about the trajectory that society is on, and if you're going to be optimistic about where we can get as a culture, we need to address whether or not people care about privacy today, not whether or not they cared about it 2,000 years ago. And I think the evidence is very straightforward and clear that consumers value privacy, citizens value privacy, and companies and governments are increasingly taking steps to give individuals greater control over their data. In some circumstances, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and there are always going to be hurdles and challenges. But at the end of the day, I think the key question to ask is, do users care about privacy right now? Do they want to better control how their data is collected, used, and shared? And the answer to that's an unequivocal yes.
Well, it sounds like it's always been important, but there seem to be some big trends right now which are driving a greater perception of the importance of privacy. So let's focus in on 1 or 2 of those. And I'll start with you, John. So the rise of machine learning and artificial intelligence, how does that impact privacy, and does it help or does it harm?
Well, I think like any technology or any suite of technologies, machine learning and artificial intelligence is largely neutral as to whether it helps or harms folks' control over their data. Implemented appropriately, it can bolster privacy-enhancing technologies. Entities can make better inferences about what my privacy preferences are than they could just having humans analyze the data about what I like to do with my information and whether I want to post publicly or share this data with this third party. But it also raises some real challenges because some of the most effective artificial intelligence and machine learning solutions are also the most opaque. And that means there are challenges for accountability about how those algorithms are making decisions that impact individuals. And it also poses challenges for privacy about how those algorithms are manipulating, in some cases, really sensitive data in ways that consumers may or may not expect. So my view continues to be that the technology is largely neutral, but at the end of the day, the question is how are we going to maximize the benefits and how are we going to mitigate the risks?
Great, thank you. And Alessandro, you do a lot of research in this area. What's your perception of machine learning and artificial intelligence?
So I actually agree with John in that there are hurdles created by machine learning and AI in the field of privacy, and much of the debate seems to focus on the hurdles, perhaps rightly so, but there is also the upside. John was hinting at that, referring to companies using machine learning to learn about consumers' preferences. I'll push it even further. It's not just companies, but it's users themselves who can be provided with apps and tools that learn over time about, from their choices, about their preferences, and then help users navigate the endless privacy choices that users nowadays are required to make. There is a problem, in my view, with current notice and consent regimes in that they put way too much burden on the users to constantly be notified, read, understand policies, and then make the right decisions. And considering how many sites, how many apps, how many online and digital services we use every single day, it is untenable to expect that users can constantly make the right decisions and keep themselves informed about all possible trade-offs associated with all these apps and services they use. However, we can try to use machine learning and AI to the rescue, right? Because we can try to provide users with apps that help them making those decisions.
Right. So you see potentially machine learning coming to the rescue of privacy to help
potentially
a bunch of different apps. Well, that's great. And when we move, I think you've touched on it already a little bit, Alessandro. Are there tools out there that help people to better protect themselves and better manage their privacy?
Oh, there are plenty of tools. So basically, if you think of one type of digital/electronic transaction you are doing nowadays, it's almost guaranteed that there exists somewhere a more privacy protective version of that transaction, meaning that in the last 20 to 30 years, computer scientists and cryptographers and security researchers in academia and in the industry and in the government have worked on privacy-enhancing technologies, PETs, which can address privacy in almost every conceivable scenario. So we have privacy-enhanced browsing. We have more private ways of sending messages and emails to each other. We even have, as oxymoronic as it may sound, privacy-preserving collaborative filtering and privacy-preserving targeted advertising. Basically, there is almost everything that we are doing nowadays with data can be done while simultaneously protecting some data. So the technology is there. However, wearing my economist hat, the technology is not free, not in the sense that it costs end users in terms of money. Many people can use, for instance, Tor for free. And Tor is an anonymous browsing application. But in the sense that once you remove a certain type of data from a transaction, you may have a degradation, perhaps, of the quality of the transaction. So wearing my economist hat, the very interesting research question is if we accept that there is this degradation of quality, then who is really going to bear those costs of degradation? So is the consumer who is going to bear the cost of using these technologies by, for instance, having less targeted advertising, not so useful advertising? Is it the companies that cannot monetize data as well? Is it society as a whole because we lose the ability to innovate as quickly? We do not really know, and I believe this is an essential question for economists to address together with technologists.
Good, thank you. And John, in your world, what do you see as helping from a tools perspective for consumers?
Sure, I completely agree with Alessandro. To boil things down into three very concrete things that individuals can do to better safeguard their data. Number one, use a password manager to generate long, high entropy passwords and continue to make that a seamless experience as you use online services. Two, enable two-factor authentication wherever you can. And three, use whatever the highest level of security is on your mobile device, whether it's passphrase, PIN, some sort of two-factor there, because the threat models that most individuals are facing have very specific vectors: mobile device, email and financial accounts, other sorts of things. That those three steps are not going to be perfect in solving those problems, but they're going to go a long way to mitigating a lot of the concerns about safeguarding data.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a final question now, but one from the audience. So I see one coming through. Okay. As companies continue to move towards omnichannel, how can they protect themselves against privacy and security risks related to IoT or the Internet of Things? It's a great question and follows on really nicely from the conversation. John, why don't you start on that one?
Sure, absolutely. So I think number one, on the security side, you need to vet IoT data, IoT devices, IoT sensors, and vendors in a very serious way. Just because these sensors and just because this data is often available at a reduced price, the sensors can be fairly cheap, the devices can be fairly inexpensive, they can get you lots of robust data sets. It doesn't mean that you don't need to pay attention to it. It means that you, in fact, need to pay more attention to it, because there have been gaping security holes in some of these devices and some of these sensors that can really put your business at risk and can create risk for your compliance system. In terms of privacy, omnichannel is something that can potentially benefit businesses and consumers if it's used in a way that's privacy respectful and if it's used in a way that is contextually obvious to the user. There are a great many folks who make a distinction between the online and the offline shopping experience, the online and the offline data collection and sharing and use experience, and you've got to be respectful of those guardrails and those boundaries as you move from multi-channel towards something like omnichannel.
Good, thank you. And Alessandro, PwC and Carnegie Mellon University have a Risk and Regulatory Innovation Center together on the CMU campus, and this is one of the issues we're busy working on together, researching the sort of risks around the Internet of Things from both a privacy and security perspective. But what are the areas you think have the most impact and that companies really need to think about when they're considering the Internet of Things in their privacy and security thinking?
Linking back to John's comment, the technology can create new privacy and security risks, but can often also provide the solution. And the center, the new research center we have now at CMU, sponsored by PwC you were referring to, has a number of projects aimed at creating tools through which companies can be proactive in the way they manage consumer data in general, but IoT in particular. IoT is definitely a challenging area because the massive amount of data which will be collected by IoT devices, coupled with the absence of user interfaces that we are adept to leveraging for making privacy decisions, does create big challenges in terms of how can we make sure that data will be collected and used with end users' consent. But there is also lots of good research going on in that area. To give you just one example, as you were asking Sam, imagine a world where we can instrument people's mobile devices with tools that communicate with IoT devices in the physical environment where the individual is, and then act as agents or brokers on behalf of the end user in relation or in their relation with these IoT devices. This addresses the challenge I was mentioning earlier, that it is untenable to believe that consumers can, by themselves, express consent and make informed decisions for all privacy trade-offs they face today, but perhaps we can try to help them through technology make those decisions.
Thank you very much. Well, gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining us today. To the audience, I hope you found this session informative. If you'd like further insights in this area, please follow me on Twitter at Grant Waterfall. And thank you very much for watching.